Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video I wanted to share with you my thoughts on Cris Tales, which is an RPG that's going to be coming out later this year on November 17th, 2020. It's developed by Dreams Uncorporated and Sick and published by Modus Games. Now there's a roughly 1 hour demo that's available on Steam, and you know what? I've had more spare time than usual, so I decided to give it a shot, and I wanted to share with you guys my thoughts on what I got to play. So I said that Cris Tales is an RPG, more specifically it is a turn-based RPG. In fact, in their announcement trailer from just about a year ago, I believe, it specifically calls itself a love letter to classic RPGs, which is right up my alley immediately. And you know what? It kind of oozes that right from the beginning. It has a unique art style that's pretty pleasant on the eyes, and the music is pretty damn good as well. Some themes were a little too similar, but you gotta stick to a theme, and it definitely does that pretty well. I mean, listen to this. This is just the generic battle theme. Now, the characters I got to play in that hour, they're okay, but the way the story is told in the demo kind of leaves a bit to be desired. It feels like dialogue is kind of missing, or even entire scenes are missing, which makes sense. There's probably things they're leaving out for the time being, cutscenes that are not done yet. So I'm going to hope that that kind of fixes itself, and that's not going to be the case for the rest of the game, because there's a lot of interesting things that happen, but they kind of yada yada their way through some things, and I don't know if that's because there's dialogue missing in between that's just not in there yet. So I hope the full version is improved in this regard and gives the characters and scenes a little bit more cohesion. The voice acting was also okay. There are some that are better than others, but there's actually nothing that bad. You know, sometimes there's that one grating character in an RPG you just don't want to listen to. And I didn't experience that in the demo so far. So that's definitely a thumbs up from me, because when you have to play an RPG for tens and tens of hours, then it could be pretty bad when one of the first characters is unbearable to listen to. So good on you for that one. Now, the big thing with the game for me is the combat. We only get about an hour with it, so it's hard to judge the other things outside of a very surface level analysis. The combat, on the other hand, we can break apart and at least create some expectations about what the full game will be offering in regards to bosses and enemy types. So as I said earlier, the combat is turn-based. There's a turn order listed at the top, a la like Final Fantasy X style. It actually has a Super Mario RPG style menu, and actually there's quite a few elements that felt inspired by Super Mario RPG, which I'm a huge fan of. The style menu basically has almost Persona looking menus that when you press like a directional button on the D-pad, it opens up different types of menus. Like if you press right, it'll give you some attack options. If you press up, it'll give you like defense, items. So if you're familiar with that, it kind of works like that, but not entirely. Also, in the case of pincer attacks, which are really common in this game, and that'll make sense why in a little bit, you can choose which direction to aim attacks by using left or right on the D-pad. So it's functional and it's fun. Another thing that's a lot like Super Mario RPG are timed attacks and blocks. I actually love this mechanic in RPGs, and I'm sad I don't see it more often. So for those who haven't played Super Mario RPG, basically if you time a button press on attacking an enemy, you get an additional effect. Sometimes it's an additional attack, sometimes it's just a crit, but you always want to be timing pretty much all of your attacks. Blocking also has a similar effect, where if you press a button when you're being attacked at just the right time, it greatly reduces the damage you take. And it was incredibly important to my survival. Again, I'm just a huge fan of timing-based mechanics in a game that's otherwise very menu-based. It keeps you on your toes a little bit, and I'm hoping that that's going to actually be really important later in the game. Now, those are all things I can reference from other games. However, it does have a very unique time control-esque mechanic in combat. This was really satisfying to learn, and the understanding of basic elements in real life, kind of that knowledge is rewarded in game, and it'll make sense to you when I explain it. So the entire game kind of uses this time control mechanic, and calling it time control is really disingenuous to how the game explains it, so I would recommend actually playing it, because it will explain it far better than I am. I'm leaving all the lore out of what's actually happening with this mechanic so you can experience it yourself. But in short, enemies on the right side of the screen can be pushed forward in time. Enemies on the left side of the screen can be sent back in time. I mentioned earlier that pincer attacks were incredibly common, and this is the main reason why, because the way that this actually interacts with enemies on the left side of the screen and the right side of the screen is incredibly important. You don't have to worry about back attacks or anything like that, so it's just a matter of this mechanic putting you in the center more often than not. And again, you'll also deal with this time mechanic and actual puzzle solving in the rest of the the game. I'm just focusing on the more combat-focused elements. Now, this has a number of effects whenever you choose to invoke a time crystal. Enemies can actually be aged or de-aged, which changes the type of enemy you're facing. Let's say you have a really big, strong brute on the right side of the screen. Now that's the side of the screen where you can send them forward in time. So if you send him forward in time, he becomes an elder. Now that weakens his physical attacks, but he becomes a mage in the process. So you've now completely changed the type of enemy. On the left side of the screen, if there's an elder and you send him back, he'll become a brute. So he'll lose that magic power, but he'll shift to this pure physical monster, which is going to have completely different stats, completely different movesets. And it's really, really important understanding the age of every enemy type. A king slime could be really big, but also really slow, so I have more turns to actually take care of it. Whereas the baby slime self-destructs on its next turn. So it's really satisfying to learn all these different enemy types and how they interact with the time mechanics, especially depending on what side of the screen they're actually on. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what happens if they can't be aged or de-aged anymore, and they actually are pushed to their temporal limit, and they take a huge burst of damage instead. So that's great for bursting down targets like the baby slime, where if I know it's going to self-destruct, I can just send it to the past on the left side of the screen, blow it up, and I'll be fine. Or if it's on the right side of the screen, send it forward in time so at least it doesn't blow up on my whole party. I just love talking about the different possibilities and elements of this time control mechanic. Now, another way that it works is with status effects, and this was also really satisfying. Now, there's some that are really kind of normal. If you like poison or burn an enemy and then, let's say, send them forward in time, then they'll suffer all the damage in one instant. Now, this is true if you were to send an enemy into the past and then pull it back into the present, or take an enemy in the present and send it into the future. So this has to be weighed across things like what type of enemy they're going to transform into, how much damage is it going to deal, and you can use it in some pretty intelligent ways. So this on itself was fun, but it takes another step when I explain the next part. The game fortunately includes a boss that tells you it's actually going to get a little bit more interesting than that. The demo's boss is covered in a giant metal armor. It's completely impenetrable, but you'll notice that you have a water spell. So you can use that water spell on the boss and send them forward in time to rust their armor so you can attack. That immediately gives you all sorts of ideas of how you can time control different elements that you've experienced in your everyday life and how that may apply to a boss in the future. That was the most fun part, is thinking of, oh man, it makes so much sense. And then I started thinking about all the different ways that things, depreciate over time or devalue over time, or I don't know. These are just words I'm throwing out there rambling, but it's a lot of fun. Now, the demo did also come with a challenge mode specifically, which had several back-to-back fights with no recovery. I don't know if that's going to be a feature in the main game, or if it's just there to let you experience combat on a more difficult scale. It's basically a bunch of battles back-to-back, no recovery in between, and the difficulty is kicked up significantly. I still beat it on my first try, barely, but I did do it, and I have a feeling most RPG experts won't struggle too much with it if you just understand the basics, but it's a taste of what the game will be capable of, and I really hope they don't hold back on that, because they could get really creative with this, and it's already as fun to play as it is in the demo. So, hoping for the best for Cris Tales, because it's off to a great first impression, and I will be playing it on November 17th, 2020. Now, there are some things that I'm still curious to see how they're going to pan out. I didn't get to see much of a character progression system, didn't get to see much of an actual equipment system. So some of the more quintessential things that I'm used to in RPGs, I didn't really get to explore very much because the demo just wasn't long enough to do so. So while there's a few interesting characters and these time effects are really neat, we still need to see other elements like that. I've also already made mention of some other concerns I have, like the actual pacing of the story and the way characters yada yada through a few things. But other than that, it has potential. I'm going to be paying attention to it. I am going to be playing it. And I'm hoping that some of these things we get more information on before then, and then I can update you on them. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for my video on the Cris Tales demo. Be sure to go download it and try it yourself. It's free on Steam right now, so go do it. But thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned because I'm going to try to play a few more RPG demos and do more videos like this because it's a lot of fun. So I'll see you guys in the next one. And until then, take care.